All right. Timothy Kent Smith, thank you for being here today. You were a teacher and a coach and retired from that, and then became a commercial actor and also a writer. What first drew you to teaching?
I think I always enjoyed sports. I was very athletic in high school, and I was always into fitness, more fitness than sports. And that just seemed like a very natural fit for me. My father, he was also a physical education teacher. So I was around that a lot. I was a gym rat. He taught in a different district, but growing up, I'd always be with him at different events and different things. And it's funny you asked that question because I had a guidance counselor who was very concerned that I was being pressured to become a physical education teacher by my father. Very strong personality, ex-Navy. And, but nothing could be further from the truth. I was just really into fitness and it seemed like a very natural fit for me. So that's why I went in to become a physical education teacher. And I've taught everything from kindergarten through grad school. So I really had a very interesting educational career.
Wow. They have, so I think in college, I took some physical fitness classes as electives like weightlifting and sports medicine and some other things. But is that the type of stuff you were teaching in the grad school?
Yes, what happened was, and this really leads into the book, where the book came from, the idea of the book. But I'll answer the educational question first. So I started off as a physical education teacher for 4 years. During that time, I was going to grad school, and I got my master's degree in exercise physiology. When I started teaching at the university, I was pursuing a PhD, but I cut that short, and you'll see why when I talk about how I got into writing the book. But so I have an EDM from Columbia University in applied physiology as well. So I was teaching things like cardiac rehab, research and design, which is a fancy way of saying statistics. We were doing a lot of work in the human performance lab, and I was the one who crunched the numbers for all the studies. I also taught adult fitness programming and courses like that. So, yeah, it was all exercise related at the college scene. Public school, I've taught elementary, I've taught high school, I taught adaptive phys ed, and my last 10 years were junior high or middle school. And I loved it. And I think my students loved it because it's where hormones run wild and insanity rules. Middle school's the best. I mean, it's just so much energy. So if you can channel that, you can have a great time with it.
Yeah. Wow. So what then, how much have you carried over of that to just regular everyday life now? Still have like a pretty hardy physical
I'm very
regimen you
active.
do?
Yeah, I do a modified CrossFit workout most of the year. I change it around, but a lot of compound movements. I go to the beach a couple of days a week and run. It's pretty ugly. I should say plod, but I give a good effort. I ride my bike several days a week. I lift weights probably 5 days a week, but vary the routines. Play some golf and just enjoy being recreational activities. Enjoy being outside, moving, doing things. The bike riding and the beach also is an important part of the day for me for my writing because it's rhythmical activity I don't need to think about, and it just clears my head. There's no phone, there's no other person involved, there's no music. It's just me and my head, and a lot of stuff comes in and ideas blossom, etc. So I think that hour of the day is really critical from a creative standpoint for me.
Do you usually do that in your, is your workout stuff before you do writing or after you do writing in a day?
Well, I'm not writing at the moment. I'm thinking and coming up with the next one at the moment. But I wrote the book while I was still teaching. So that was mostly writing at night after the day was done. So I can't really answer that question per se, but I usually go to the beach in the morning unless I'm golfing in the morning. And then I usually ride the bike later in the day. You live in Florida, you know, you try to avoid the heat during the day. So I do the bike
Mhm.
rides late in the day, I do the beach first thing in the morning. They're waiting for my parking space when I leave about 9:15. I'm down there for about an hour. And it's a great way to wake up.
Yeah. Something about getting that early morning sun in your eyes is supposedly good for you. I guess you know more about that than me with all your teaching and education in it.
Well, I don't know. It works for me.
Yeah. When you are writing or thinking about it, do you listen to music when you're biking or running? Or
No, no, keep it pretty clear. I'm not a music. I listen to music in the car. We have it on in the house a lot, but I like to go out and listen to bands and stuff. But I don't. No, I don't use that when I do the creative process. I pretty much just go into my head myself.
and when people ask you what you do now, do you say I'm a writer, or how do you address that?
I'm going to be extremely honest with you here. The first thing I do is start laughing. And I tell them, I can't even say this with a straight face. What I do for a living now is commercials. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yep. And I'm like, you wouldn't even know me half the time when you see me on the air because sometimes I have a beard or there's makeup on or whatever. So now I view myself as I don't really have an identity. Some people really have an identity they attach to something. They're a former coach, or they were a vice president at some company, or they were a high school principal. I just enjoy life. But what I do now is I do commercials. It's not everyday work. They come in bunches. I could go 2 months with nothing, and then this month coming up, I'm probably going to be pretty busy. I do that. And the whole time I'm doing that, I'm observing, I'm watching, and I'm thinking about what the next book could be. I've written one book. I'm enjoying that journey. It'll be out a year come June. So a number of things have happened in that time, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. And then thinking ahead, what could be the next one? But as you know from being a writer yourself, it's you just don't sit down and write a book. There's a lot that goes into it before you even start typing or putting it on paper.
For your first one, did you find that you had a lot of the story in your head already before you started writing, or how'd you manage that?
Yeah, no, I did. So here's what happened. I'll give you the whole scenario. So I told you I went to college. I got out of college. I was teaching physical education. I went to a university. I was getting my master's degree, and they liked me. They thought either I was a good student or maybe I fooled them or both. But they wanted to hire me when I was done with my master's degree, and they were expanding the department. So one person was leaving, and they were going to replace him with three people and expand the department. And I was one of the three people. Um, so, uh, Another true story. I walk in the gym the first day that I'm there for orientation in the summer before I actually start teaching. And this guy walks in another door who I knew. And I look at him and I said, "What are you doing here?" And he goes, "Oh, they just hired me to be with the human performance department." I'm like, "Holy cow, they hired me!" I played lacrosse with the guy in college, and he was a fraternity brother. And then the third person came in the room. He was a very nice gentleman, also. So the three of us, we're young, we're in our 20s, and we play hard, but we worked hard. We learned a lot. We had a cast of graduate students, and we were really rocking and rolling. We were going to conventions, we were presenting papers. It was really kind of cool. And the gentleman I described as knowing, and I say this with the utmost affection, he's the mad professor. He just people trust him and love him because he's so brutally honest, but he's the mad professor. So sometimes he can't get out of his own way and get things done. I'm very pragmatic. So we were a good team together. And what happened is he started, not the first year, but over time, started to get asked to write training manuals. People started asking if he could train their fitness staff and things like this. So we formed a partnership, consulting company, and that's what we did. For example, we wrote the training manuals for the YMCA's of America. We wrote the training manuals for Johnson and Johnson's wellness program, which they were selling to corporate fitness programs, because back in the 80s, corporate fitness programs were huge because it reduced insurance rates. So they were selling those, and we would go in and train staff. So we worked our schedule out. The university loved it because it gave them notoriety, and we were covering things and really creative in how we did that. We were teaching our classes. And we started traveling all over the United States for Johnson and Johnson. We also sat on a national fitness committee, which at the time was very big and prestigious, and was writing a lot of position papers. So fully engrossed in academia, but still being pragmatic. And then one day, and this really was the life changer for me, we got asked to work at a very exclusive spa on the eastern end of Long Island in Montauk. At the time, it was one of the top 6 health spas in the world, up there with Greenbrier in West Virginia, with Baden-Baden, and they wanted us to screen their guests when they came in the first day, so we could recommend classes they should take, treatments they should take, maybe based on blood pressure and health histories, things they should avoid. And so we started doing that. And we were dealing with a lot of mafia people, because it was owned by the mafia. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but it's when you're 20 something years old and you're walking through a parking lot and John Gotti's cutting through the same parking lot with 4 guys around them. It's interesting, but no problems. Everybody goes about their own business. But where you have mobsters, you also end up with entertainers. So there were a lot of entertainers coming through there, people you would know from TV, from movies, news shows, things like that. And it's like Vegas. They seem to find each other. They mix. So it was really interesting to me, because I grew up very modest means in Westchester County, north of the city, but a very blue collar upbringing, blue collar town. But they weren't the people with the money. The people with the money were people who were hedge fund guys, corporate raiders, trust fund people that it's amazing how they managed to keep the money they made. And so those were the top 1%ers. And I had a woman come up to me after we met, and she was there for a week, and we talked several times. And she said, "Would you be interested in being my personal trainer? I live in Manhattan. I also live in the city, Manhattan, but I also have a house out here in the Hamptons." They also had a house in Europe. They also had a house in Palm Beach. And these were the 1%ers I'm talking about. These were the types of people that I'm rubbing elbows with at a young age. Very, handled it differently maybe than I would now. I wasn't in awe of them, but I was interested in them. So I became a really good observer. So I said, sure. And I started with her, and one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I was dealing with 40 hours a week of private fitness sessions in the Hamptons at a pretty good amount of money for that time. I couldn't do it all anymore. I couldn't do the university. So I walked away from the university. My partner that I mentioned, he really wasn't into that. So, but we kept writing training manuals. We kept doing trainings. I helped them there, but I was out of the university full time. I did stay on and teach one class at night. I had a few projects to finish up. So we transitioned that way. And I opened the private fitness business. And that's what I did with these 1%ers. most of them were really nice people. Most of them were pretty normal people. But as you can imagine, there were quite a few that were very eccentric. Um, I'll give you an example of what happened one day. I'm training this woman in her bedroom, always in her bedroom. The bedroom's bigger than my house, right? The phone rings. Now they've got 3 servants, okay? She shoots off that floor and she shoots over to that phone and she hits the first button because I'm sure she thought the girlfriend was calling while she was in an exercise session, because the husband, who we all knew was screwing around, probably told the girlfriend between 2 and 3 o'clock, I'm free, call me. So she hits the number and she goes, hello, in a real nasty tone. And then she calms down and she goes, oh, hold on a minute, Mr. President, I'll get him. She hits 1, she hits 2, and she says to her husband, Ronnie's on line 1. It was Reagan calling. So these are the types of people I'm around. Helicopters are landing because they have more than 10 acres. You know, somebody's coming in for a strategy session or wanting donor money to run for office. It was a whole nother world for me. So this is all going on. I also had a dominatrix as a client, very nice lady. I had a woman, you probably know people who are sales reps. Some people rep windows, some people rep doors or driveways. She reps sexual toys. So I learned a lot from her because I'd see her on weekends and I'd be like, hey, how was your week? And she'd be like, oh, we got this new thing that just came out. It's multiple speed, it's waterproof and whatever. So I have, sometimes in life, you just can't forget things you hear or things you see. So I had all these ideas bouncing around in my head. And it's sort of between the morning show, which is on Apple TV Plus, which is about Matt Lauer. And Matt Lauer, ironically, of course, lives in East Hampton. It's sort of a cross between the Epstein story, which isn't a good story, but that stuff really exists. So what I did was I also opened a physical therapy center at the time in town. There was a need for that. So I had the private training going on. I was still consulting. I'm doing the physical therapy center. And I was really burning out. And I had a son born, and I wanted to spend more time with him. And summers, you know, he was going to go to school, and I wouldn't see him in the summers because that's when I was so busy. So what I did was I sold everything off, and I went back into teaching. And believe teachers won't believe this, but it was like I retired at the age of 30 something. I mean, it was unbelievable because I was living a crazy pace. But I would tell stories once in a while. Somebody would say something, and I never mention names, and I won't do it here. But I'd be like, "Oh, I had this person one time, and they did this," and they're like, "What?" And so what I thought I'd do is I'd tell a story and tell what it's really like behind the hedgerows when we drive through the Hamptons or Malibu or LA or any of these things, and we see these super rich people and we think they're living the charm life. And the reality is they have a lot of toys, but you know, they may have 4 children, 3 are fine, 1 has some issues. They deal with infidelity the way we maybe have or our friends have. So what the book is really about is human nature, the temptations we face, the choices we make, and what the consequences of our actions are. And then I don't want to give the book away, but as we get near the end, um, the protagonist gets a second chance. So who among us wouldn't want a second chance, a do-over on something? And how do you handle that? Do you learn from your past and do something good for people, or do you just keep doing the same thing? So that's what the book is really about. But it's set in 1987 across one summer in the Hamptons, and it's the interaction of trust fund people, with the people who have to be seen at every party, and enough money is never enough money, and their identity is the car they drive, the address they live at, what the nickname of their property is, because all the properties have a name. And so that's where I said it, and that's what I wrote about. And the feedback I've gotten from people has been, it's pretty crazy and pretty interesting. But I've had a great life. I really have. So the beginning of the book is actually sort of about me until the private trainer loses his mind one day. I don't want to give it away, but that's when it stops being me. But everything that happens in this book could have happened, or I witnessed it happening with other people.
Did you think about setting it somewhere else to avoid any real people saying, "Hey, that's me"?
No, I didn't. And the reason I didn't is, and I can't speak for other writers, but I think most writers write about something they know about or something they're into. Um, so the setting made sense. You can't have super rich people like that living in Greer, South Carolina. They live in the Hamptons, or they live in Malibu, or whatever. What I did do, though, was I was very careful not to mention names of streets, or write about a particular person. What I did was I grouped all the trust fund type personalities into a character called the Stanwicks. I grouped all those corporate raider type people into a person, or into people named the Stevensons. So I had the different personalities interacting with each other, showing how they did and didn't get along, but then also how they treated other people not like them, like me as the trainer or the gardener, or taking advantage of the good looking young girl that happens to come into their life, or somebody else's daughter, just because they don't like that somebody. So they're going to seek revenge that way. So I was very careful not to do that. A lot of my clients, now that the book is out, are no longer with us. But I was very careful to avoid just what you're thinking about, identifying. Nobody can read that book and go, "That's me." I think they'd be hard pressed to do that, and I was very cognizant of that. I was very aware of that.
How'd you pick the names of the families?
Um, well, um, I have different ethnicities involved in the book, and I picked names that are kind of neutral and would fit in that environment. I have some Jewish people, I have some Protestant people, I have some Catholic people. And I just picked names that I thought would fit those categories. So,
There's oftentimes where just in normal living that I think lend to the idea that we are in a simulation just by the names of people you meet in the positions they are or the things they do. And you go, man, there's no way. That's a little on the nose. If I was writing a book, and maybe I didn't notice it so much before I wrote, but after, when you sit down to write a book, and then you're like, okay, I've got to have this character. Well, what's the character's name, and what's their last name if I give them a last name, and what are the names of the places where they live and their friends and all that, that you realize how much names matter. And then you start to see that in the regular world, and you're like, oh man, that's a weird name for this person to have that's in this position. So it's
right.
strange to think that, I guess you get a little insight when you're creating a world in a book versus the creation of whatever we're in right now. And you go, oh, okay, I see the fingerprints of creators in that rather than just happenstance. But I don't know, maybe that's just the writer mind trying to make
Well,
sense
and
of
you
things.
know what? Sometimes there's a fine line between fiction and reality. But like the Stanwicks were my trust fund people. And I mean, they still worked, but they made a lot of money. It was handed down and stuff. Stanwix sounds like came off the Mayflower. So I felt the name fit, you know? So I tried to match up names that I thought would be real for the thing. One of the interesting things, when I first started writing this, I started writing it 10 or 15 years ago, probably more like 15 or 20. And it was awful, but who knew at the time? And what I did was back then, you would send a query letter and 3 sample chapters to an agent. And I was using agents mostly in Manhattan or in LA, but mostly Manhattan because I figured they might have a house in the Hamptons. And so that attached to that. The plot was awful. But 3 people, 1 from LA and 2 from New York City, said to me, "You really have the people, the places, and the mindset for that time down pat. The plot is awful, but you understand the people and what was going on." So I, being the positive person I am, I took that as a win and I ran with it. That was something to build on, right? That was a foundation I could build around. And so I did. And then I let the book sit for a while and I thought about it. I thought about it, come back to it and change some ideas around. I had a friend read it who's an avid reader just for his feedback. He couldn't put it down. He read it in one night. It has changed a bit since he did that. But then I got the plot straightened out. And the other thing I did this time around, when COVID came, I revisited it and finished it because there was a lot of downtime. And my wife was very supportive. She said, "You know, you put so much energy and effort into this book. You really should get this done." Because you're not, not getting any younger. So she was polite when she said it. But anyway, so what I did was I wrote the book. I got an editor, and that was money and energy well spent, who does this for a living, who edits books to read it and edit it. She was not really receptive at first to doing it. She wasn't sure of me being a phys ed teacher. Can he write a book? She wasn't really sure of what the subject matter was, but she got into it. I was getting emails from her at like 2:30 in the morning. I'd wake up the next morning and she was up all night burning the thing. She really thought it was good and was one of the better books that she worked on. And then what she did was, and this is critical, and I would urge any writer to do this, she sent it to 4 beta readers that she uses. One woman couldn't get through the book. She said, "This just isn't my thing. I don't care about rich people being nasty to each other and other people. I could care less what they're into." And she just couldn't read it. And that's fine because you're not going to reach everybody. She had a male read it who was in his early 70s, and he read it in a day and a half. He could not put the book down. Had a couple of minor comments, but he loved it. She had an 80-something-year-old woman read it, and there's some steamy sex scenes in this book. But they're there because what they do is they bring people together. They're necessary. They're not just there to shock people. They tie everything together. So this woman says, she says, "Boy, have I lived this sheltered life. But man, was it interesting. I thought it was pretty good." And then this other person read it and she liked it, but suggested we change the order of 3 chapters at the beginning of the book. And that was a game changer. That made the book turn around and become the hook that we set was so much stronger and better. So those are and you know, I have to be open-minded as a writer to that. I can't say, "Oh, no, I wrote it, you're not changing it." You have to step back, reflect, and say, maybe they're seeing something I didn't see, and it's a give and take. So it really becomes a collaborative effort if you do it right. you still have ownership of your material, and you don't have to agree with everything they say. I didn't, but a lot of what they suggested I thought was really good, so it made us a stronger product. The reviews and the people who have read it, I'll summarize that quickly. People from the Midwest don't get it until I explain. They're like, "Oh my god, those people, that's horrible, the stuff that goes on like that." Because they're, plaid shirts, khaki pants, Holy Mother and Minnie Pearl, everything's wonderful. The people from the tri-state area, which is New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, and Long Island, their comments have been, "Tim, you're spot on with what you're writing about. These people, you nailed it." And my wife and I used to have a condo in Costa Rica. So I worked that into the book too. I don't want to give the book away, but a lot of the book takes place in the Hamptons, on Long Island, a little bit of Westchester County, which is just north of New York City. A lot of the book takes place in Costa Rica as well. And people who have been to the Hamptons or to Costa Rica really thought I described those settings very well. So, I feel good about that. It's like it's genuine. People are driving down the road and going, "I've been there." You call the bar something else, but this is the bar you're talking about, right? And I'm like, "Yes." So that's kind of cool when you get feedback like that.
Yeah, I wonder then, is your ideal reader, are you looking for people that are now in their 70s and 80s because they know what it was like back then? East Coasters in their 70s and 80s?
I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. But I've had a number of people in their 40s also read it and like it. I think people who are avid readers would like it. I think people who like to hear about how the rich live and what they're all about. A lot of these expose shows on I don't know which station it's on, but somebody does something crazy and they want to see how did they do that? Why did they do that? I think those types of people would like it. A number of readers have suggested, and this has always been in the back of my head, it would make for a great streaming series, like on Netflix or something like that. I could see it being strung out for about 2 seasons. Um, so I think, to your point, I agree with you. I think people who lived through the 80s, who remember what discos were like, cocaine was running wild at the
Mm.
time. AIDS was running through gay communities at the time. And there's stuff that's in the book. I think people can relate to that and go, they were some crazy times back then.
Yeah. I would imagine you got like Generation X and prior, like baby boomers and Generation X. Those
Right.
people that grew up watching Miami Vice would be the
Right.
type of
Right.
people that look at it or read it. I like the tagline of "the plot's awful and so are the people," but I mean, maybe you don't want to say that about your plot since it's been reworked, but it's that's what came to mind when you were talking about. I think you have people with money get bored, so then that's where the palace intrigue starts.
I agree with you 100%. We all get bored to a degree, right? Um, we all see things and make decisions to a degree, but a lot of times with the super rich, they just take everything to the next level. Um, they buy a Bentley instead of a Chevy. You still got to drive it to the grocery store or whatever and
Mm.
park it. I mean, why? So everything seems to be in excess. Not all of them. I don't want to categorize all of them, but a lot of them also have a big sense of entitlement. They see something they want, they think they should have it, and they just go for it. And they don't understand the lives they're ruining in the process, many times including their own. They just trample people to get what they want, to say they got it. And again, not all of them. Some are really down to earth, very nice people and stuff. But I thought it was a tale worth telling. And again, I don't want to give away the ending and everything. Most people did not see the ending coming. Throughout the book, a lot of people thought something else was going to happen that didn't happen. So they kind of didn't always make the connections that they were thinking, which kept them going to the end to see how it all came together. I also did something else when I wrote the book, and I can't even tell you when I thought to do this, but I did it. A lot of times books are written from the first person's perspective, point of view, POV. A lot of times it's written in the third person, or a narrator tells a story. What I did was I had a reporter, if you will, an editor. And again, I don't want to give the book away. She knew this guy from a previous life. She knew the protagonist from a previous life. She goes and interviews him. So the book is really, most of the book is about a 1 week interview she does with the protagonist. And he tells her the story of his life, how he got to be where he is now in his 70s or 60s. And she serves as a liaison between the protagonist and the reader. So you as a reader are reading the book and you're like, why would he do that? And then she'll kind of ask him that, and he'll explain to her why. So and I think that worked really well in this case. So it's a different format that way, because at times you think she might be falling in love with this guy, and then there's other times where she really is scared to be around him, and then at other times she shows empathy and she understands what he must have been going through when some of the things happened. So I think as a writer, if I can do three things, I'm doing a good job. One is engage the reader, right? Engage the reader. The second one is they make them want more. The second thing is entertain them. There should be some levity in there. They should have an entertainment value where they're like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? And then also, oh my gosh, that's awful. So the third thing is evoke emotion. There are times when you read the book that you're going to be angry with him, or you should be angry with him. I mean, he does some nasty stuff, but there's other times where you feel sorry for him because he's dealing with a bunch of crazy people. And then there's other times where maybe you reflect on your own life and you say, well, yeah, I can see where he's coming from. I've been there, not on the scale maybe he was, but there. So I think if, as a writer, if I can engage people, entertain them, evoke emotion, and get them thinking about their own lives and relating to that, I think I've done a pretty good job. And that's where I get enjoyment, is when someone stops me on the road and says, Tim, I read your book, man. Where did you come up with this woman? Where did you come up with this guy? Did that really happen? How did you think of that and stuff? So that's all good feedback. Then I know I did my job.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how characters develop when you're writing them. And then you have to put those different perspectives in so the people that are reading it do care about them enough to keep reading, yet
right.
The character is going to do what the character does. So the idea that they have to be in danger in some parts, or there's some sort of peril and then some sort of growth. It's interesting when you look back at a story, whether you are following those patterns or recommendations or not, of how it seems like stories just fall into those because you're used to hearing stories or reading stories yourself. And then when you tell a story, it has those elements automatically.
Right. And that happened. I read a lot. I read a lot of fiction. My whole life is fiction. my whole life is, I'm very creative, only child, a little off center. But
there's your title for your autobiography.
Just a little.
My whole life is fiction.
Center. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm George Costanza, But you mentioned if you talk to any English teacher or you go to a writing seminar, they'll talk about roughly, they may phrase it different or whatever, but basically a 6-step approach. You have a hook, you set a hook and draw people in. You have an incident take place. Now they're what happened? I can't believe this happened. Where's this going to lead to? So third thing is you build momentum. Builds, it builds, it builds until it reaches a point of crisis. And then when that crisis hits, they're really engaged now. They're like, where's this going to go? And then it hits a climax, right? It gets even worse. And, who doesn't love a good climax? So now you got them. And then the last thing is you have resolution. How do you get out of the story? What do you leave them with? And so it's interesting you brought that up, because I didn't consciously write that on a piece of paper and go, okay, now I'm going to set the hook and now I'm going to do this. I just told the story. And I think at the end of the day, and I think anybody who knows me would say this, I'm a storyteller. I love to engage people. And oops, I just wiped you out. Can you see me?
I can.
Okay. I love to engage people. I'm affable. I think people would describe me as that. And I like people. I'm fun loving. So I just tell a story. And I think in this time, I kind of got it right,
When you were over the years of writing it, did you have a specific place where you would write?
Yeah, I had
Was
an
there a
office.
specific creative? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a good energy vault or something, but I would write at a desk in my office. I had a house with an office, so I would do that. Yeah.
Is that the only place you write, or depending
Yeah,
on the
pretty
scene or
much.
whatever, would you go somewhere else?
No, but we still have a connection to Long Island, so I would go back once in a while. And when I was there, I wouldn't consciously write, but I would make sure I had names of streets right and things like that, so that I could change them. And since I wrote this, or since 1987, a lot of places are no longer there. Some are. So I had to be careful of that, like we discussed before, and change that around. But I think there'd be times where, okay, I'm at the beach, right? I'm doing my thing, and thoughts come in my head. So when I get back to the car, I'm writing down some quick notes so I don't lose it, and then come home and tighten it up and write it and stuff. So a lot of notepads, spiral notebooks, and then I can't find the page I'm looking for because I wrote it so long ago. But a lot of notes, a lot of that, different color pens. This character's blue, this character's red, or maybe this setting's red, this one's black. So things along those lines. But I think if you're a writer, I think if you're a creative person, and I'm sure musicians and artists are this way too, it's always with you. Every waking moment, your mind is cranky. You can never put it on hold. It's tough to just clear the head and gear down. Or it is for me anyway. Probably ADD. They didn't test back then, but I'm sure I'd set the record.
Where do you think that that creative energy comes from?
I think being an only child, I mean, I didn't have imaginary friends, but you learn to be creative, to entertain yourself and amuse yourself. And I think that leads to some creativity. And the other thing is, I've always been one to observe. I was very shy as a child. If you knew me now, you'd find that hard to believe, but I really was. And I think I observed a lot. So I watched, I took stuff in, I questioned some things. And I think all of that probably contributes to a creative mindset. I think out of the box. I just don't see things for what they are all the time. I overanalyze sometimes.
You may not think that you had imaginary friends, but I would submit that every character you've ever written is an imaginary acquaintance.
Well, you may be right, but they're based on people I knew. But you're
Yeah.
right. You're right. I read something the other day. Someone was saying she read a book and she said, "I'd love to meet this character. I'm in love with this character." And somebody else said, "You know, he's not real, right?" And she goes, "I know, but man, I'd love to meet this guy." So you may be on to something there.
I think that's how you get those, whether you're reading it or watching a show or whatever, you get those characters that resonate with you or that you just want to see what happens with them or how they react.
Right.
And especially when you write the character yourself, is you probably have many other scenes in your head, whether you wrote them down or not, of different situations. Like that book could probably be 3 or 4 times as long if you put all that stuff in. And even today, you probably are still thinking about, oh, well, how would this character deal with this situation? And that's the essence of writing, I think, of that creating characters, is wondering how a person, whatever their makeup is, whatever you're drawing from to create their personality. That's why it's exciting when you're writing, because oftentimes that character takes on the life of their own and they say and do things that you didn't see coming.
Right. Right. Because you have to get into their head. You have to think exactly like how would they react to that. And so maybe you have somebody else do something you weren't initially planning. Then you have to go back and say, well, they would have handled it this way. The other thing is, if you do it right, I think they really do become real. You bring them to life. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Yeah.
If you do it correctly, you bring those characters, you make them bigger than life, where people really can relate to them. So they walk in a room and something's going on. They're like, "Oh, Joseph's not going to like that. He's going to, that's not going to float with him." So, yeah, I think you're right. They're imaginary, but you want to bring them to life.
Yeah. In some science fiction way, they've spun off into an alternate reality and they're existing there, and you can go back and visit them every time. I think that's part of that creative energy, or whatever you want to call it, that's outside of ourselves. If you believe that creative energy is outside of ourselves, that you can go back and figure out their whole story from the last time you talked to them. If you started a book that took you 15 years to write, and you had a character at the beginning that you wrote in the first year, and then you came back 10 years later, you can still figure all that out, what they've been doing in that meantime. Oftentimes it's interesting to take a character that from a story you've written and put them somewhere else in a different one. Like I do science fiction writing
Different
sometimes.
environment. Yeah.
Yeah. So you take that same character that you have from 1800s short story you wrote, and then now you put them 1,000 years into the future on a spaceship. They're still that same character. And you're so far ahead. That's why I think short story writing is good for writers, because you're developing so many characters that now you have that personality and the sensibilities and everything built in. It's already, that character is in your head so much that it's going to affect that story in ways you didn't imagine, because they weren't built for that story. They were put into it.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Oftentimes, when I wonder how I'm going to develop a character, then I would take people that I knew and you melt those in together. But also, one that works for me is animals that I knew. So dogs you had growing up, cats, whatever, pets, things like that. You've assigned them a personality for years, sometimes great friends, whether it could be a stuffed animal or whatever, something, a G.I. Joe person you played with when you were a kid, or a Lego person that you developed a story for, and you can put that into a book. So I think have you had that moment when you were writing where two characters came together where you're like, oh, I wasn't sure if they were going to meet, and then they had a conversation that you weren't expecting?
I don't think so per se. Yeah, you have the book is written from the perspective of a private fitness trainer. So he visits clients every day, right? So some of my clients in the book, let's say, some of Hunter's clients knew each other. Some liked each other, some didn't like each other. Some lived across the street, they'd wave, they didn't really connect. Other ones did connect. So I pretty much put them in places I needed them to be. But to your point, and I never really thought about it until just now. In real life, it would be interesting to see how they got along with the personalities of what they are and all. One thing I did, you mentioned 1,000 years later. I didn't do that, but um, when all this was going down, it was the 80s, right? And now it's 2022 or 23 is when part of the book is the end of the book. Um, so at the end of the book, I do tell the reader what happened to all these people. So I had to think about how they spent their life, where they got to. Some it was pretty, some it wasn't so pretty, some had this happen or that happen. But I did age them all out, and I had to consciously think about that.
Yeah,
And
that's
that
a
was
nice
fun
touch.
doing it, actually. And
Yeah.
and people seemed to like that at the end. That, oh man, okay, tied it, because I
Get
was
a little
wondering
closure.
what happened to that person. You
Yeah.
know, she did what? No, but it was good. It gave him closure. You're right. So
Getting back to the character development for a second, another way that I found that maybe as kids we do it more and then we just hold on to it as we get older, where you personify things to make them more understanding. Like in Florida, this is going to connect Florida and the mob. You have palmetto bugs, which are, giant roaches is what they look like, but I think
right,
they're different somehow. I mean, I'm not as I'm not as worried about a palmetto bug as I am a roach, because the roach just seems a little more, that's a sanitary thing. The palmetto bug he's just passing through.
correct.
So we when we see them, in order to get over that initial shock of it, because it takes a few exposures to a giant palmetto bug before you can keep your cool without, it comes across or it shoots across the floor or it flies somewhere and you're like, holy cow. But we call them Paulies for palmetto bug, Paulie. So they also talk like a Paulie would talk. So it's, if you're walking through the room, you turn on the lights and there's a palmetto bug doing something. You go, whoa, whoa, hey, Paulie, what's going on? He's like, hey, I'm checking the fridge here. I'm just checking things out. And then you have to capture Paulie and release him,
Right.
because if you smash them, it's just going to be messier. You don't want to have to get rid of the body.
You
So
put the cup
just capture
over
and
him and
release.
slide the
Yeah.
index card under him, take him out to
Yes.
his
Yes.
friends.
You've got that in your house. I think every person in Florida has some sort of system like that, at least,
For,
stationed around the house somewhere.
for
So you
us,
can,
it's the geckos. Yeah.
oh, okay.
Not the palmetto
Nice.
bugs, but the geckos in the
Hmm.
pool area, the lanai.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of personifying it so you can understand it a little better. And then you got a whole backstory for Paulie. Like every time you see the palmetto bug now, it's a conversation with Paulie goes on for 5 or 10 minutes, while you're taking care of it. And that's a little better than just running over and stepping on it.
Well, you
So
create a personality for the bug.
I think that's what life teaches you, is to run over and step on it. Your figurative creativity. Don't
Right.
think about, the backstory of that bug.
Right.
And then if you're a kid, you're probably like, oh, I'm interested in that. So as you get older, I think you hold on to those things in some creative part of your mind. But you
Right.
mentioned that creativity is always there. How do you find the best way to tap into it? Is it the running and the biking, or do you have other ways?
Um, I think rhythmical activity that's mindless for me works. so that I'm not focused on. I'll give you an example. Playing golf isn't the time to be creative because you're focused on the shot. You've got decisions to make based on how far you are, what club, what are the hazards, where's the wind. But when you're just plodding along and you've done it so long in your life, you don't have to think about it. That's when stuff can come in. So for me, it's pretty much during rhythmical activities. Sometimes when and we don't watch a lot of TV, but we do watch some streaming shows on Netflix or movies. Um, Sometimes I'll see characters there, and that'll trigger a thought that that character may be perfect for my thing. But of course, I have to write it a bit different. I can't steal that character, but a personality like that might be a good fit. So, you know, with my characters, in my head, I know exactly what they look like. And then I try to get that down on paper to a point. But you also want to give the reader a chance to develop their own perspective on what that person looks like. So it's a fine line. You may say, oh, he was a handsome man, taller than the average man. Then let them run with it and come up with a picture. I have one friend who read the book. He does this with all the books he reads. He writes the characters down and he takes an actor to play the role of that person. And then, like Pierce Brosnan is Joseph Stevenson or whatever, so that in his mind he can keep it straight. So I think different people think that way, but you've got to, if you engage the reader, you've got to give the reader a chance to develop the story with you in their own way, in a way that works for them. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and for me, I think a lot of it came naturally. And by doing podcasts like this one with you and with some others and speaking to book clubs, it's a really great reflective process for me because I start thinking, like you raised some issues today, and I took a few notes, and I'm thinking about, why did I do that? Okay, would I do it again? So I think there's a lot of moving parts, but I think one of the most valuable things an author can do is read a lot, and that gives you ideas. It ties stuff together. It gives you character development, things along those lines. I read a lot of Dominic Dunn books back in the 80s and 90s. He writes about high society in New York. He was invited to all the parties. And then he wrote about them, the two Mrs. Grenvilles. That was set on the North Shore of Long Island. People like us. Really, it's about people not like us. And then, An Inconvenient Woman. That was the mistress. It was good until it wasn't good. Then she's out of sorts. So where does she fit in? Because ultimately the guy's going to go back to the wife. So I have some of that type of stuff in my book. I thought I read his stuff so long ago, but it resonated with me. It stuck with me. I know what Sutton Place in Manhattan looks like. I know what Turtle Bay looks like. I know what Central Park West looks like. And there are distinct differences in the personalities of who would live in each of those places. And there's a big difference between East Hampton is more historically trust fund money. Southampton is more new money. West Hampton Beach is more Wall Street money and art. So each of those Hamptons had its own personality, and I had to weave that into the book in a way that worked. And they don't always like each other. The old guard in East Hampton, they don't want Hollywood moving in. They tolerate a few people because their parents lived there and they grew up summering there. but they really don't want the Hollywood set. So there's a lot of moving parts in that, and if you get that right and you're genuine with it, and I think some authors like that help me. Lawrence Sanders, who's no longer with us, he wrote a whole series set in Palm Beach with this crazy guy named Archie McNally, who worked for his father. But Archie was always dealing with the rich widows and the rich, people like that. So I think you take from that, you draw on all those experiences, and you bring them together, and makes you a stronger writer.
Yeah, it's usually when I'm writing, I try not to read the genre I'm writing when I'm writing it, just because
Correct.
I
Well,
I
you don't
don't
want to
want it
steal.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want it to inadvertently become a part of it, and then I'm just writing fan fiction for a book I'm reading. Then, but it does help reading. I don't know. A lot of writers say you have to read a lot to write better, and maybe that's true for everybody's different. But I do worry about if you have it all fresh in your mind, other things you've read and you liked it a lot, and then it just seeps into what you're writing. I guess that's the point of it, but I do worry, especially if you're writing things like poetry, where I try not to read poetry because I'm writing it. So I don't want, or you see a poem and you're like, oh man, that's a good poem. And now you're like, I got to find something that's like that, or I want to write something like that, or I want to write
Right.
something as good as that, or whatever. So it's weird to walk that line between comparison and trying to be original in a world that there might not be anything original. So
Well, for the final push on the book, the final year and a half where I really, really got it together, I did not read much. Certainly nothing about rich people like that. Maybe a C.J. Box, which is a Western or takes
yeah,
place out west. It's not a Western, um, but I think what I was trying to say and what authors are saying is when they read a lot, they know what sounds right, they know what works, they know how to put some of the puzzle pieces together to tell a story. Um, so I think from that perspective, it helped. But then when you're actually sitting down doing it, um, you're too busy to read.
yeah.
Yeah.
You want that unconscious input about what keeps you interested as a reader, because then you're like, well, I like it. If I like it, somebody else is going to like it. I just need to find that person that likes what I like, but I need to know what I like, whether I've written it down and understand it.
Hmm.
I know the things I've read and I go, okay, that's a nice little way to do a story. And then hopefully it filters through the mind enough to where it comes out in some novel. Can you
Way.
obliterate the word with the word? Yeah. Then,
A
yeah.
novel
So
way, a
yeah,
different way. Yeah. New
a
way.
novel.
Yeah.
I'm going with novel. I'm sticking with that, a novel.
Do you have people in your inner circle that you would have read for you just for feedback?
Yeah, that part you were talking about having the beta readers. I do have people that I send like maybe the second or third draft to. And if
Mhm.
I'm doing something that has parts, like if I'm thinking this is going to be a couple different books, or if it's a story that has part 1, 2, and 3 within it, then I maybe send them a part that I'm done with. And that helps motivate you to keep writing and also gives you a little accountability because somebody's looking for it, on top of seeing if it tracks, seeing if somebody looks at it and goes, yeah, well, I really don't care about these characters. And you're like,
Right.
well, that's going to be a problem because you're not going to want to read more. But
Right.
yeah,
The problem with using friends to do that is, friends are going to tell you, "Oh, it's wonderful," but you need some honest people. I'm fortunate in that my wife is, and I say this totally lovingly, she's brutally honest with what she
yeah,
thinks, and she reads a lot. So, she'll say this doesn't flow or it's too wordy. You don't need this much. Sometimes less says more.
Mm.
You mentioned before about you can make it that big. So another question I get asked all the time is, do you count words? How many pages do you have in a chapter? Um, my answer is I just tell the story, and it, when in chapters can break off, they, it makes sense kind of. In the book, my Behind the Hedgerows that I wrote, um, there's 5 days of interviews. There's some stuff before that, so that kind of that breaks it up. But even within those days, there's different chapters based on where the setting takes place, what he's talking about, and stuff. So I just sort of let it happen naturally. But some people get caught up on word count. Some
Mm.
people get caught up on page count, and when a book comes out, the page count's going to be determined based on what size font you use.
Mhm.
So it's all
I
relative.
I use word count more than anything, and that's just for accountability. Plus, if you have a project and you say, I'm going to do a book that my main goal is to put it on an e-reader. So an e-reader, you don't want 3,000 or
Yeah,
100,000 words. You
yeah,
want 20 to 30,000. You want to novella link something to where somebody's going to read it and then they're like, oh, okay, I'm making progress as I go through here. And then your chapters or your pauses in the chapter are something that you can read in a sitting really quick. So you can say, oh, I read this, and
right,
maybe I'll go ahead and read this other one in the same sitting, but I could also just read these few pages and then go ahead. And
right.
maybe that's part of that reading a lot of other things. So you have that in your mind of, well, this is how long a chapter should be, or this feels right, or this feels
It's
too
like
long. War and Peace feels different.
it's like an intrinsic clock in your head.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I did that by breaking up subtitles within chapters and stuff. So let's say they read 5 pages and then they got to go do dinner or something. They can do that. But
Yeah.
because I've read books where the chapters go on 20, 30 pages, that's hard because sometimes I need a break and I don't know where to take that break. So,
Yeah.
but again, it just sort of happened for me.
And then you're in the action and then you have to pause in the middle of the action to go do something else. So you want that natural pause of the chapter break or the section break or whatever. I like Moby Dick for that it has chapters that are dense. Like it would take me 10 or 15 minutes sometimes to read 2 or 3 pages of Moby Dick, but that chapter is only 2 or 3 pages. And you go,
Right.
well, I can do this pretty quick. But then you get in there and you're like, what is this word? What's this word? What's this word? So now you're building your vocabulary on top of, learning how to use a dictionary again. But it's, yeah, I like having, I think that's the thing you worry about at the end of your book is how I'm going to break this up. But you're also thinking about it when you're going through it because that's just the way you write it too. Like if you're
Right.
writing a chapter and you say, I'm going to finish this chapter in this sitting, and then it takes you 12 sittings to finish this chapter, then maybe that chapter is too long
Right.
or you're
Right.
not writing
Well,
enough.
I've heard some people use word count, say, okay, today I'm writing, 2,000 words. I
Mm.
write X, I'm making up the number, but I'm writing X number of words every time I sit down. And I didn't do that. I just kind of told the story. And then sometimes you'd have to go back and fill in or create something so that it made sense later on. So there was a lot of that. But I really enjoyed the experience. I had fun putting it together. I had
Yeah.
fun with my characters.
I like a word count at the beginning to help you figure out what kind of writer you are. Like the first book I wrote, I did when I was felt like I was a full-time writer. My goal was 2,000 words a day. And sometimes I went way past that. And sometimes it was a struggle to get to 2,000,
Mhm.
but it kept you in the practice of this is what you're doing. So do it and set a goal for yourself and accomplish it.
Right.
And then after that, I have a thing now where I just try to write 300 words a day. And that way I can feel like I'm a writer because I did something today that was writing.
Mhm.
But of course, if I'm doing poetry, if I do a poem, finish a poem or work on a poem, then I would gladly trade 2,000 words of a novel for one good poem that could only be a few lines long,
Right.
because it's just a different thing to me. But you got to set the goals, or otherwise you're not going to do anything. And you have to set the goals enough to where you're going to do it. So even if it's 100 words a day, put a note on your computer that says write 100 words a day. It might not be the final words that end up in the story,
Right.
but you're going to get better at showing up and writing
Right.
consistently.
And there are days where it flows. There's days where you think it flows, and then when you look back on it, you go, wow, that was a lot of wasted time. But then there's days where you really struggle too. I think, I can't tell you how many people I've heard say, when I retire, I'm going to write a book, because everybody has a story to tell or an interest in something. But I think the biggest difference, and it kind of addresses what you're talking about, I think the biggest difference between those who succeed and those who don't is the ability to persevere. It's the ability to get the job done. And it doesn't have to be done quickly. It has to be done. It's like the tortoise and the hare, but you got to get to the finish line. And I think that's a part of my personality is I do persevere. I do make things happen that maybe I have no business making happen, but I find a way to accomplish it. And I think that's the biggest thing. So I think people, they need to sit down. They need to write. They need to have a game plan of when to be done. And word count's a way to achieve that for sure. For sure.
Yeah. You have to have some sort of accountability. And then the idea is writers write. So when you go out and run on the beach or do your exercise where your mind can do its own thing and think about other things, when you think about that and you don't write it down then or close to after that's done, then you're not writing. But when you write that down and you collect those notes, those things add up over time. For sure. You go for a run and you write down a paragraph.
Well, I'm not
more than you have
physically writing, but I'm writing. Yeah, but I'm not. Yeah. So
But when you get back and you got your spiral notebook in the car, you put your bike away and people are waiting for the parking spot and you're writing some notes down. That's what makes you a writer.
We're in Florida. They're just tourists. They could wait. They may not be happy tourists, but they're
What are 3 things that you've learned from writing then?
3 things I've learned from writing. I've learned to have an open mind and collaborate, not to think you have to have all the answers. I've learned to have thick skin. The career in doing commercial TV work has taught me that as well, because you're going to get rejected far more than you're going to get successes. And I think the other thing is I learned to not that I learned it, but it just reinforced what we just talked about, was you got to persevere in life. You got to have a plan and you got to follow the plan. And sometimes you'll have more success with that than others. But if you have a plan, you follow the plan, usually good things will happen. May not be great things, but it'll be good things. And you'll be further along than you were when you started the process. So.
Nice. So you said you're working on another book now, or thinking about working on another book?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have ideas in my head. I think I would love to write a book about a retirement community. I think that could be pretty comical.
What's that one in Florida with all the loofahs?
Yeah,
Those are steamy.
There's stuff out there. I mean, there are. I just love watching people. I mean, you could go to Publix and see it all, or Walmart or whatever. So I enjoy people. I enjoy people watching, but at the same time, I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to write about people I live with or anything like that. and put them on the spot. So you have to be careful about how you do it. But I've got a few ideas and stuff. So we'll see where it heads. I think the book I wrote, Behind the Hedgerows, is probably one and done. I could spin off something maybe with her, with Melanie Alper, who was the reporter. She could get into another situation. But I don't know. For the moment, I'm just seeing where this takes it, listening, seeing what's good, what's not good. And then that way I won't spin my wheels when I jump into the next one. But I kind of formulate ideas. So
Between projects, one of the things I do just to keep that writing regularity up is just having conversations between different characters. So it could be a character that you've written about before or one that you've made up, and it just keeps that fresh in your mind. And whatever your modality, if you're writing it or if you're typing it, that you just get that showing up and doing, quotes and having the dialogue and practicing putting the words on the paper. And it may not be something you ever use, or it's something that when you're gone and they have the museum of the house you grew up in and all your books there, that somebody's going to look at that and go, wow, look at that. These are conversations between characters from different books.
It's really funny you mentioned that, because I had 3 conversations this morning between a guy, his wife, and his parole officer. And so, I mean, I'm starting to formulate things now where I'm getting the personalities down. And so it's interesting you even mentioned that, but the next step, is to start just spinning some stuff down on paper, because eventually those pages expand and you expand off that. It's kind of an outline, but it's such broad strokes at this point,
gives your mind something to work on too. So your mind knows that you're still interested, like that, whatever that creative thing that's in your mind, it's not just sitting there waiting at a door that you're not opening. It's one that, like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Let's do a little short story. Let's do a 3-page thing about this. Or even if you don't write it down, if you're just thinking about it, that's pretty great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the end game for me isn't necessarily the next book. What I would like to do is I would like to take this book and see it either on the silver screen or as a streaming network series, which I think I mentioned earlier. And a number of people have said they think it would be great, would lend itself for that. So I've been spending a lot of my time reaching out to some connections and trying to get to decision makers to take a look. I don't think people realize how hard it is to get things published or get a show on TV. I read somewhere once that said agents will only take 1 to 2% of the books that are sent to them. Then a publisher will only take 1 to 2% of what agents send to them. To get something on the screen, these decision makers, and I'll just pick, I'll say Netflix for the heck of it. It could be Paramount, it could be Hulu. Everybody in that office probably gets 20 ideas a day. Oh, did you ever think of doing this? Did you ever think of doing that? So they get sick of it, and they hear the same things over and over again. So one of the reasons I self-published the book instead of going through a traditional publisher, because I'm now 70 years old. So if I go to a traditional publisher, I'm going to spin my wheels again for 2-3 years. Somebody might take it. Then it's another 2-3 years before they get it published. Now I'm 75. I'm running out of time. That's the reality. So what I did was I self-published it for a variety of reasons. One is it gives me a tangible object that I can give to you as a decision maker. And it's not just a piece of paper. So when you get this from me, you may not like what I'm saying or the idea, but I'm genuine and I can do a body of work, because here it is. So you put it on your desk, right? And it sits there. And somebody else may come in and pick the book up. and say, "What's this?" And you say, "Ah, I got another idea from somebody today." And they're like, "Well, I'm going to be on an airplane. Can I take it with me this weekend?" And they may read it and come back and say, "Wow, you know what? You got to read this. It's pretty good." So that's why one of the reasons I made it into a book. The other reasons are it's registered with the Library of Congress and it's also copyrighted. So I protect myself. They can't steal this and run with it. Or if they do, I have some recourse. And then because of the acting, um, I've made some connections, and some of those connections, unfortunately, are with people who are kind of now retired and are out of the loop, if you will. But I've been able to get the book in front of several decision makers, and we'll see where it heads. But it's a hard nut to crack. But that's where the perseverance comes in again. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But I really believe you got to believe in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, no one else is gonna. And you've got to show people you're serious about doing it. So um, I'm really reaching out and trying to do some things and get connected in LA, and do some things that'll get this book to that next step. Not because it's going to make me super rich, just because it'll be a sense of accomplishment. It'll be cool to see how far I can take it.
Mhm.
So that's my end game.
From my experience with that for script writing, I'm really glad I started practicing script writing. I don't have anything to show for it really now besides just practicing it a couple drafts, but it is a different thing than writing a novel. And it makes me, I think, better at writing novels when you write scripts. So
It's a
I think
whole
that's
different
something to
animal.
practice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a whole
it's something to
different
practice
animal.
because it lends itself to that minimalist writing though,
Oh,
because you
yeah.
don't have to explain a whole lot of stuff. And then you get your script together, you get your treatment or whatever they call it in the business, that couple page summary of it. And
Mhm.
then you get your log line, maybe a storyboard that you could probably do with some AI help, if not a person, and get your characters down there. And maybe that makes something more to present to somebody, to sell your idea to them, to market that idea to them. So
Yeah, I think the key is just getting to the right person, and having the discussion, having having the chance to give your pitch. Um, but uh, but that's a whole different animal, writing scripts. And I'm probably not the guy to do that at this point in time, to be honest about it, to know who you are and whatnot. But if someone likes the idea, they'll make it happen. So um,
what's the best way for people to follow your work?
I'm on every social media platform you can imagine. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Pinterest. I'm on YouTube. I have my own channel. I post stuff there. I also have a website. It's right here. They can look up here and write it down. TimothyKentSmith.net. If they go on there, there's different headings. One is representation contact. They can contact me there. They can get a link there to order the book. They can look at past commercials I've done and get a good laugh, a good grin out of it. I take what I do seriously, but I don't take myself too seriously. And that's always changing. So I update what auditions I've gotten, what jobs I've been submitted for, what jobs we shot for, what jobs are airing currently. So there's a lot of information, so they can go there and see it. And I post at least a video a day on all those websites, um, and TikTok as well. TikTok following's growing, so um, I'm accessible, so they can see what's going on and stuff. But if they go to my website, they can get a good grip on what's going on. and I'm open. If they have questions, they can write to me, and I'm very good about getting back with an email to them and responding. And I help people when I can, because one of the things you find on your way up is people really don't want to help you when you need help. So if I can help somebody and pay it forward, I'm going to do that. I may not be able to help them, but I'll try. But that's one of the most frustrating things is, where were you when I needed you? Now
Mm.
they come to me. Well, I don't need you now. I needed you then. So, but that's probably human nature. So they can go there. They can buy the book, any bookstore. I like to have people go to their neighborhood bookstore, independent bookstores. Ask for the book there. If they don't have it, they can order it for you. Bookhampton out in East Hampton carries the book. Bookstore one in Sarasota carries the book, and the Island Bookshop in Venice, Florida carries the book. I know they keep selling out of the book. They've been wonderful to work with. So, but they can go directly to the publisher, which is booklocker.com/12864, and that'll bring them right to the book. They can get ebook or paperback. But they can look up Behind the Hedgerows on the internet, and they'll get it. Most people seem to buy books from Amazon. It seems they're the big bad wolf. They're the
Mhm.
ones everybody goes to. But I like to help the independent bookstores as well. So,
All right. Do you have links on your website to your other social media?
yes,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I like your website. It's nice to have one place to go to be able to look at everything. Then you have your blog there and everything too.
thank you. Yeah,
That's nice.
yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover,
No, I
or
had a
any
great
thoughts in
day
closing?
today. I had a great day today. I learned a lot from you. You asked great questions, I thought, and thought process, and I appreciate you took the time to check me out before we interviewed and do the homework. It was a great experience. So I really thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of other things we could talk about. So maybe we revisit those in the future, and we see how your how your book's going and what you've been up to. But I have a lot of notes of different ways the conversation could go. So it's
Yeah, good. Maybe we could talk about the world of TV. It's pretty interesting. Get into
yeah,
some fun situations, a whole different life than what I lived before. So, but it's all good. It's all good, and yeah. So tell people. I'll tell you this. I can't talk about it, but May 6th. I know this is going to drop in April. May 6th, national ad coming out. It'll be pretty funny. So I'll
okay,
be in that. But they can go to my website, and I'll have it when it drops, and they can learn more about it then. So
okay, nice.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
All right. I appreciate it. Yeah.
All right, I'll talk to you on the other side of this.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. All right.